Welcome to another episode of Electable. I'm Deb Chubb, and our podcast is sponsored by the Indiana Women's Action Movement. Today, we are just thrilled to be with Mayor Tom McDermott, who is running for U.S. Senate in Indiana. So this is such a huge race, and this is such an important race, and we're going to talk about that. But first, if you could just give us a little bit of background about you, Mayor McDermott. Tell us where you come from, and where and why you're running.
First off, thank you, Deborah, for inviting me to your podcast. I appreciate it very much. My name is Tom McDermott. I've been the mayor of Hammond for the last 18 years. I was elected when I was 34 years old, and I'm running for U.S. Congress against Todd Young. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Northern California, actually. My mother and my father were divorced when I was very young. So I grew up with my mother and my two sisters in California. And every summer I went out to my father's family that was located in Hammond, Indiana, funny enough. And I did that my entire childhood. So I became very familiar with Hammond, Indiana, with politics, because my dad was in politics when I was a young man. And I also, grew up in California with my mother, and, she was a single mom most of the time, and how hard that was. So I feel like, actually, not that that was an education, but I think it really helps me a lot currently, growing up in a situation like I did, seeing the good and the bad. My dad did very well, and my mom struggled, and she was a secretary. And I think it was good for me as a whole person, as a candidate. So I've always tried to lead with those thoughts in mind.
That's excellent. And so, tell us your educational background.
I'm a lawyer. I went to the University of Notre Dame. That's where I got my law degree. Before that, I was a PNW finance major, Purdue Northwest. And before that, when I was 18 years old, graduated from high school and joined the United States Navy for 6 years, which was really my primary education. Taught me how to be an adult, taught me how to be a man, taught me how to be an electrician, which mostly through my 20s, I was an electrician, and the Navy taught me that trade, which is nice. It's funny how much I've forgotten now. I can hardly change a light bulb now, but at one time I was really good with my hands at one time. But so now I'm a lawyer. I'm licensed to practice law in the state of Indiana, but I don't really practice much. I'm more an executive as the mayor. It's an important job. We have 1,000 employees and a lot of issues that come to the mayor, and I'm their full-time elected mayor. So.
That's great. Wow. You do have a good background. I was a single mom, and I know many women who are single moms, and, it's a real disadvantage, financially, educationally, career-wise. It's very tough. And it really, it bothers me. My parents got divorced when I was very young too. When my parents got divorced, my mom couldn't get a credit card in her name. She couldn't get the utilities turned on in her name. It was, it's really, it's more than a disadvantage. It's, it's outright discrimination. But
I remember when I was very young, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dad, but
that's right.
When it's the mid 70s towards the late 70s. And at that time, I was one of the very few kids I knew whose dad didn't live with him. My dad wasn't even really in the picture. He was across the country. And I'm not saying he wasn't part of my life, because every summer I did stay out there, but I always felt that pain growing up, knowing that my mom and my dad were separated by 2,000 miles. And that was always tough on me, but I think it made me tougher as a person. And I became more independent because I did fly back and forth. And back in those days, I'd fly to Chicago by myself. I was basically 6 and 7 years old. You could do that back then.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, let's get on to the Senate race. So,
Sure.
So tell us why this is such an important race. We have 2 U.S. senators from Indiana, both Republicans, both very conservative, both pretty much, and correct me if I'm wrong, towing the line as a Trumpist. That is to say, the election was rigged, which is, just carrying on the big lie. I
Right.
remember seeing Todd Young on January 6th. I was watching this like everybody else on Twitter, pretty much, and he was wearing his military, jacket, his army
Camouflage jacket.
Yeah. And was out there, talking to, the protesters and, chatting and saying, yeah, you're right. And so
Deborah,
anyway,
I'm so glad you picked up on that, because I picked up on that also. And I thought it was strange timing for Todd Young to be wearing his military camouflage, which is that's signal, like you're going to war. And on January 6th, he chose that day to wear that to the U.S. Senate. So I asked this question, and his people got back to us and said this was his military jacket. This is what he wore when he was in the Marines, and that is not true. I could tell that's not a military jacket he was wearing. So I thought that was very strange, also that he wore camouflage on January 6th.
Yeah,
I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not what you wear to the Senate. I mean, and that's the
Surely
only
not.
time I've seen him wear that.
I promise you, if when I become your senator, I'll never wear camouflage to the U.S. Senate. Okay.
All right. Well, good. That's a good start.
Step one.
Yeah. So, all right. So tell us why this Senate seat is so important.
Well, in a lot of ways, it's about relevance too, because Indiana, even though, Barack Obama won Indiana in 2008, and even though we've elected senators that were Democrats and we have mayors of big cities that are Democrats, the Republican Party in Indiana acts like we don't exist. And the people that feel like us don't matter. And it's a arrogance that needs to be eliminated. And that's definitely one of the reasons I'm running. Okay. Is I'm a good candidate. There's millions of people in Indiana that feel about I do the same way I do on issues that are important. Right. And yet the Republican supermajority and the Republican Party in Indiana wants to act like we don't exist and our opinions don't matter. So in a lot of ways, it's about relevance, Deborah. And also, in my opinion, the U.S. Senate is broken. The filibuster is not needed anymore because of party politics. People are refusing to even consider opposing thoughts. And I don't think our founding fathers had that in mind when they created the Senate. And quite frankly, the filibuster was not part of the Senate when the founding fathers put together our country. Well, we made that up ourselves since then. And we've changed the Senate because, back in the, 1800s and 1900s, women couldn't vote. African Americans couldn't vote. And quite frankly, we couldn't even elect our senators as citizens. And we changed the rules. So when you look at the Senate and you're talking about an issue like the filibuster, why can't we change it? The place is broken, and I want to be a disruptive force.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah. And you're so right. And when you say broken, we need to break that down a little bit and talk about that. The fact is that if you don't have 60 senators in agreement on a bill and you're a Democrat, then it doesn't even come up for a vote.
That's right.
And it's really, so it's just the threat of a filibuster can stop a bill, which is just ludicrous to me. It's like, you don't even have to actually do the filibuster. You don't have to actually stand up there and talk until, you fall over and the session's over.
Important bills like voting rights, right? Voting rights legislation that'll help, that'll prevent gerrymandering of the districts, congressional races and state races, right? Things that'll make voting easier, and things that'll mandate things like early voting so that more people could participate. This is what our country is built on, these ideas. And we're trying to pass it, and it's just not going to be considered because the Republican Party as a whole refuses to acknowledge it. That's broken. Right. That's broken. And these are the types of, and I realize it cuts both ways, that rule protects us when we're in the minority, but we need our Congress to work. We need the House to work, and it appears to be working, and we need our Senate to work, and it's not working right now. And, and then I think America gets better.
And it hasn't worked for a long time. And I want to talk a little bit more about I think is it the Freedom to Vote Act? I can't remember which one it is, but the one, because I don't think people really understand all of the great things that are in that bill. Independent redistricting commissions for congressional districts.
That's right.
Getting rid of a lot of dark money in campaigns, campaign finance reform, which, has to happen. Oh my gosh. And then of course, voting protections. And there was another one in there that I thought was so important. I can't think of it now. But anyway, it's a great bill.
It is a great bill. But the problem is it's not in the Republican Party's best interest to let a bill that makes it easier to vote proceed. So as a whole, they block this. And it's not the only issue they're blocking like that. But when they block any progress on this bill, then we're stuck with the status quo, and it's time for us to get bold as a party. I think, that's another thing about us over the years. We tend to be more sophisticated and dignified in the way, we campaign. And I think it's time to play by the Republican rules. When Barack Obama was president of the United States, he put up he put up Merrick Garland to be a U.S. Supreme Court justice, and the Republican Party as a whole refused to even acknowledge his appointment. And that's not right. Now we have the U.S. Supreme Court about to make a huge decision on Roe versus Wade in June. And, we got a lot of problems in Washington, D.C. And when you have people like Todd Young that just toes Trump's line, when Donald Trump tells Todd how to think, Todd thinks that way. It doesn't matter. Hoosiers don't matter anymore to Todd Young. We don't have money and we're not Donald Trump. And we need to teach him that the bosses are the Hoosiers, the voters, and that's who I'll represent.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. What else do we need to know about your campaign?
Well, it's interesting when you file to run for U.S. Senate, you get pulled in three directions immediately. First, everybody calls me up and says, you have to talk to so-and-so like right now because they're vitally important. And then literally there's about 200 phone calls that you have to make on the same day that you announce. Next, they go, Todd Young just raised $5 million. you got to start raising money, Mayor. And and then they compare what I could raise, which is like a couple 100,000 so far. And they're like, how are you going to beat Todd Young when he raises 5 million and you raise 200,000? I got that obstacle to get over. And then third, in Indiana, we have this rule that says if you run for U.S. Senate, you have to get 500 signatures per congressional district. And this is the deadline on that is February. So in my opinion, the most important thing I'm doing right now, and not that the other two aren't vitally important, I'm still doing them, but we're focusing most of our attention right now in the campaign on getting those 500 signatures per congressional district so that we could be on the ballot. Because if I'm not on the ballot, I can't beat Todd Young.
Yeah. So that was one of the issues with Todd Young was that he was in charge of the Senate fundraising something or other club. And so really raised a ton of money. And, this is why we do have to pass that bill. We have to get some of this money under control in politics, I think. It's
because
really...
we're not important. We're not important anymore. If you're not bundling millions of dollars together for Todd Young, he doesn't listen to you. He doesn't respect you. And that's not how it's supposed to be. And, when they want to compare me, I'm not going to raise as much money as Todd Young, but my money comes from Hoosiers. And it comes and they're not billionaires and millionaires. They're people that are donating $50 and $100 and $200 to my campaign. And when you add all that up, you get a lot of support, you get a lot of votes, and it's going to help me get to where I need to be. So,
and another issue, I think, is that Republicans are really targeting Congressional District 1, which is your stronghold. That's where you're from. That's where your base is. And so I think I want to say it. I want to put it out there because I worry that Democrats are not prepared to really, take on the Republicans in Congressional District 1. It's been a Democratic district for, 40 years anyway. And so people have come to take it for granted a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so Democrats are really going to have to get on their game and, step up in Congressional District 1, I think, to really make that successfully a Democratic district.
I agree with you. I think we will. Frank Mervan, the congressman in the first congressional district, is a good candidate. He's a tough candidate. He beat me in a field with 18 other candidates. Yeah. And I think Frank will hold his own very well. Frank also made some key votes that helped Indiana a lot. Him and Andre Carson both voted to approve ARP funding. And in the city of Hammond, ARP was, the city of Hammond received about $50 million for infrastructure work. And the school city received another $40 million. I mean, $90 million for the city of Hammond because of Andre Carson, the congressman from Indianapolis, and Frank Mervan, the congressman from the first. People are going to remember that also. So I know the Republicans are licking their chops thinking that they got a shot in the first congressional district, Deborah, but I really don't think that's going to happen. I think Frank is looking to get reelected, and he knows he's a hard worker. I can tell you that. I watched him with my own eyes. We had a tough race, him and I respect Frank, and I think Frank respects me. But I think you'll see that he'll prevail next November.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to ask you, when you get to the Senate, what is the first bill that you would like to introduce and get passed?
That's a really good question. I like infrastructure bills. I like the voting rights legislation, and I'm hoping that it's taken care of before I get there. But because I think our democracy is under attack, I think that if the voting rights legislation, it's not successfully passed, which means they would have to change the filibuster to do that. That would definitely be the first bill I would like to take up and get passed because democracy is under attack, Deborah. And it shouldn't be harder to vote, especially as technology gets better and better. It should be easier to vote. And instead, it's the 2022 version of the Jim Crow laws. A lot of the supermajorities and a lot of the Republican Party wants to make it harder and harder to vote. And that's not what our forefathers had in mind when they created this great country of ours. It should be easier to vote.
Right. And so, when you talk about the decline of democracy, I think, the Indiana state legislature is really a really very good example. Because, the supermajority, those legislators, those Republican legislators can introduce and pass bills without a Democrat in the House. They can not even be present and still can, get a quorum. That's what the supermajority means. They can get a quorum and they can pass bills without any input from Democrats. And they now, because they've gerrymandered those districts so well, they can pass any bill without even support from their constituents, and still get elected. We have several examples of that in Indiana. Smaltz, passing, the permitless carry bill when his own survey showed that his constituents did not support that.
You're right.
So this is like really the, you're like, okay, this is the end of democracy when you can't even be held accountable by your constituency.
It's a great point you make also, that when you have districts that are gerrymandered so much like they are across the state of Indiana, and you make the other party, irrelevant. So basically you have no chance of losing in November. The only chance you have of losing if you're a legislator now is in May to a primary, which encourages the office holder to be even more pure. Go further to the right to make the hardcore base of your party happy because you don't fear losing in November. When our district should be drawn closer to 50-50 so that the best candidate can be chosen by the district, regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrat. And quite frankly, I'm a mayor. They can't redistrict me. All right. I have to represent my city, and I focus on them and on the issues that are important there. And I think that, the legislature, they shouldn't be picking their bosses. So.
Right. And so we certainly don't want to see that kind of thing happening at the federal level, which in some cases it seems to be happening, mostly, I guess, because of money. When you think of McConnell in Kentucky, how does that guy keep getting reelected? It's one of the poorest states in the country. People suffer there more than in most states. And yet he is not at all interested in bringing anything to his own constituents and can still get reelected.
Yeah, it has to do with money also, Deborah. I mean, we both know it. That you look at a guy like, Mitch McConnell, you look at a guy like Todd Young, and they could raise millions of dollars. That's, I'm starting from, it's funny. I was describing it to my team as we're starting a campfire and we're using sticks and we're rubbing sticks together. And then you start getting a small flame. Todd snaps his finger and money just pours in. And it's hard to compete with that from where we're starting from. But this is how you can't be on the ballot. You can't win unless you're on the ballot. I can't raise money as a candidate unless, I'm on the ballot. So we're focusing on the most important thing right now, which is getting those signatures turned in. And quite frankly, I know you have a lot of people across the state that are listening. And if they want to help out, they can go to gomcdermott.com and sign the petition and get me on the ballot. And I'd appreciate it very much.
Is there an electronic capacity for that, or you have to walk?
Of course not.
A piece of paper. Okay, yeah, piece of paper.
No,
all right.
I mean, that would be technology advancement. That would be, and quite frankly, that's where we're deficient. And Indiana, especially, is they don't want to. The Republican supermajority that calls the shots, they don't want it to be easier to vote. They don't want to move forward and allow electronic voting and things like that, because that would mean more Democrats would probably show up to vote, and that's not good for business if you're in a Republican supermajority. And right. And that's not democracy. That's not the intent of the framers of our Constitution and our former government. It's just selfishness.
Right. Yeah. The trend now is for Republican candidates to be filing for all these kind of obscure positions that really have their thumb on on the scale in producing election results. So we do in Indiana have a terrific Secretary of State candidate. I'm so excited about Destiny Scott Wells is wonderful. She is tough and smart, and she is committed to protecting democracy. And
I'm honored to be running with her. So
yeah,
I'm a supporter of hers as well. Can't wait to campaign with her. I think she's
yeah.
great. And it's 2 veterans already on the ticket. That's a good start.
Yeah. So, so those are the kind of positions that are so important. And it's interesting when you talk about, the money issue, how we are kind of like, we're right on the edge. We almost have enough senators to pass the bill that gets rid of some of that money, but not quite. And if we don't get that bill passed, then we will fall much further down this vortex of money, dark money, running governments, running campaigns, and it becoming less and less of a democracy. So
It's interesting. I've always run state races and I raise state money in the way we do it in Indiana, and becoming a federal candidate and seeing the way the feds do it as far as individual contributions and electronic submissions. Actually, the FEC does a really good job in that regard. As a candidate, I wish Indiana did it more like the feds do, because if you want to see how much money I raise and who I get it from, you just go onto fec.gov and you type in my name and it pops up, which is the way it should be. In Indiana, there's nothing like that. It's all paper and pencil still. Okay. So like in that regard, I think the feds do it the right way. However, where it gets really murky is with the dark money, like you said, and the super PACs where, our $2,900 donations get just drowned out by some huge corporation that drops billions,
right.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And I know this is really it's just an awful thing to think about, but there really is this system of straw persons who are being engaged to obviate the campaign donation maximum limits. And that's really frightening. People and at the state level, people coming from out of state, just you can't keep, a woman from Nebraska makes a $50,000 donation to a state legislative candidate. It's like, what? Who is this?
Right.
And where? And there are some other tracking on that to show that there's really a lot of straw persons involved in getting money to those candidates without hitting the maximum donations. So, okay. Good. So, you've already said one thing that people can do to help, and that is, of course, to contact the campaign and help get signatures onto the petition so that you can be on the ballot.
Yes, ma'am.
And are there particular areas in Indiana that you really need more help?
Well, it's easy just to say all of them right now, but when you think about it, where the Democrats are strong, Indianapolis, obviously, we're going to be all right. In the region, first congressional district, I think we'll be fine. South Bend, we appear to be fine. We knocked on doors in Fort Wayne this past weekend with an army of volunteers, and we got most of our signatures. That doesn't mean we're done in the third congressional district, but it was effective, actually. We hit the ground in Fort Wayne with data of Democratic households and pounded on doors, and we got almost 400 signatures that day. But we still need some in the third district. But so when you think about the Democratic strongholds, we're doing well there. But it's better just to say, please go to McDermott.com and then it has information on how you can do that for us.
All right, great. Okay, so I do want to ask you about some women's issues too, because I know that
Sure.
this is important too. And
It
there are other bills sitting around waiting. The Violence Against Women Act was not reauthorized, and the other bill, legalizing abortion, protecting women's right to make their own choices about their own lives and their own bodies, is sitting out there too, getting nowhere. And tell us about those bills and how you can further those issues.
Violence Against Women Act. I mean, who wouldn't support a bill with that concept and eliminating domestic violence and giving women rights that are victims of? Obviously, I'd be supportive of that, and I would do everything I can to help move that issue along. And when you talk about abortion and the choice movement and women's rights being under attack right now, I'm a sympathetic supporter as well. I was talking earlier about how Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court right now should be a reality, if not for the Republicans blocking, which is ridiculous because that's not how our forefathers intended, that process to go down. I think Merrick Garland should be a U.S. Supreme Court justice. I think the Republican Party cheated the Democratic Party out of that. And I think it's vitally important right now because of Dobbs versus the Jackson Women's Clinic decision that's going to be decided in June. And by most accounts, it's expected to overrule Roe versus Wade, which will have serious ramifications on women in Indiana, because we know our state will be one of the first that outlaws abortion and forces women, Hoosier women, to go to places like Illinois to get their procedures done, if they could afford it, if that's even feasible for them. You know, some women that's not feasible. And what are your options? I think that 50 years of precedent is important. I'd like to point out that Senator Todd Young put 3 of those justices on the Supreme Court that are going to vote to overturn Roe. I think he should be held accountable for it, because he's bragging to his base that he's going to make the right to have an abortion in Indiana illegal. He's bragging to his base about it. So he should be held accountable to our base for the same reasons, because I don't think 50 years of precedent should be overturned like that. I think that that's not the purpose of the U.S. Supreme Court. And what happened is a stain on the U.S. Supreme Court's history. And if what we think happens in June, women's reproductive rights will be under attack. And all I want to say is, where does it end? Because if they could take women's right of privacy by not giving them the right to have an abortion, then they could also, under the right to privacy, eliminate same-sex marriage. That's not a stretch. It's also protected constitutionally under the right to privacy. And if the Republican supermajority and if the Republican National Party could take that right, they could also take the right for states to recognize civil marriages, same-sex marriages.
Absolutely. In fact, it's in the amicus brief by our own Indiana guy, Bob, right? Is that his name, Bob?
Mm.
Something like, anyway, yeah, it's in there. It's already included. Same-sex marriage is already included in that line of thinking. So,
good and bad. I'm glad we're talking about it, because it's basically the Supreme Court's turned into like a city council now. And once they get the votes, precedent be damned, we're just going to do it because we have the votes. That's not the way I was raised. That's not what I learned in law school about how the Supreme Court respects precedents. It's very concerning.
It is very concerning. Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, okay. So on a nicer note, tell us where people can reach you.
Oh, during my days, I work in Hammond City Hall, and that's my full-time job, but it seems like I'm traveling more and more to big events across the state. Like yesterday, I was in Huntington County, spoke to the Democrats. 2 days before that, I was in Fort Wayne speaking to the Democrats. And so I do big events. If you do have big events, I'd ask you to reach out to gomcdermott.com again. Let us know. We have an invite calendar on there. And my campaign manager, Kevin Smith, can also be reached. He works at Smith Sursick, attorney at law. I don't want to give his cell phone number out, but easily can be reached. But I think right now, my main goal in life is getting signatures, going to big events, and raising money. In that order, by the way. I think that's really what it's about, is getting signatures first. It's most important. Going to big events so I can meet Hoosiers, and raising money. That's the third priority for me. Todd Young, that's his first priority. That's the difference.
Right. Okay. Now I have one more other kind of substantive question that I meant to ask. So tell us what your views are on rural issues in Indiana, and how you can address them.
Well, first, rural issues. I think one of the most pressing rural issues we have in Indiana is broadband, and the lack of access to broadband for many. I've gone in many houses as I traveled across the state where you can't get a cell phone signal in that house, and you certainly can't get a Wi-Fi signal. And this really hits home, not only because people like to watch Netflix and Hulu, but it also hits home for me because as we have this new strain of COVID going around and kids are starting to e-learn again, how could your kid e-learn if you can't even get a Wi-Fi signal? So it's almost like the electricity argument was in the early 1900s for a lot of America. This is the new mandate. Everybody should be able to get access to a cell phone signal and a Wi-Fi signal in our state. And I don't want to be the senator that helps make that happen.
Great. I think, one of the other rural issues that I hear often is really access to healthcare. All of these hospitals are closing in rural areas and moving to more populated areas. And so, and of course, that has really impacted our maternal mortality rate in Indiana. 30% of the counties have no prenatal services available. So, a woman who is pregnant by choice or not will have to go to another county in many cases just to get prenatal care, which means that they often don't get prenatal care. And that, again, contributes to our increasing maternal mortality rate here in Indiana. I don't
I
know,
would
is
go
it?
so far as to say that's not just a rural issue, though, Deborah. I'm mayor of the largest city in Northwest Indiana, one of the largest cities in Northern Indiana, and our hospital just left the city, just announced it was closing
Oh,
down and moving out. And so I think it's an American problem, first off, but secondly, it's a problem if you're poor, from a poorer area where there's less wealth,
right,
and hospitals don't want to be there
right.
because it's tough for them to chase money in Hammond, serving Hammond and the south side of Chicago than it is opening up a brand new 10-story hospital in Crown Point. And it's not fair to the residents of Hammond. It's not the right thing to do for this Catholic institution. It's certainly not right for that. But it's a sign of the times in America. And we have a healthcare problem. And I'm the type of candidate that wants to get in there and guarantee a certain level of healthcare for all Americans, including dental, including hearing, including vision. That should be a responsibility of the government from where I sit. And I'm not saying I want to take your healthcare if you have it. I'm saying I want to guarantee all Americans get a certain level of healthcare. And I don't know about the university, the hospitals leaving areas like Hammond and not, and leaving rural areas of Indiana. That's a common problem that has to be addressed as well, Deborah.
Right. Yeah, and that happened actually in Michigan City as well, in our
Mhm.
downtown area. And there was this kind
At
of,
least they built on the highway, though, Deborah. At least they built it there.
yeah,
The Franciscans also.
yeah, right.
They
So,
just
but there
left it.
certainly was this sense that they just didn't want to be in neighborhoods where there were poor people who were
Thank
coming
you.
in and getting healthcare. And
Well, it's a pattern, though. I mean, as long as we're talking about it, in Chicago Heights, same type of situation. It was same St. James. It was also a Franciscan hospital. They shut down and moved to Olympia Fields. In Hammond, they shut down and they're moving to Crown Point. At least in Michigan City, they shut down. At least they stayed in Michigan City on the highway. I mean, at least you got that respect. I didn't even get that
yeah.
respect in Hammond from the Franciscans. So,
Oh, yeah. And and I like that you say the government should be responsible to provide a level of healthcare.
yeah,
Just like, education and criminal justice, there are certain things that really are not designed to be in the hands of for-profit corporations.
thank you.
And when people complain about, well, God, the government managing my healthcare, it's like, okay, well, do you understand that right now your healthcare is being managed by someone who's only interested in making a profit?
That's
So
right.
that's their motivation. And they're not going to cover, certain things for you because it impacts their profit. And of course, I can't believe that more business people are not behind universal health care. The cost for businesses has just gone through the roof. And of
No
course,
doubt
now
about
it's even worse.
it.
People have delayed healthcare, and so now they're more, intensive treatment, and it's more expensive. And businesses are seeing those healthcare costs go up and up. And they have to pass some on to their staff, but this is not affordable for anybody. And at the other end of that whole picture is, corporate CEOs making millions of dollars just in bonuses,
Hmm.
because they've brought in so much profit to those insurance companies.
Yeah, we
So
got.
yeah, we have to kind of, just remember where we are now before,
Yeah,
before you get so afraid of, of government run healthcare. And, Medicaid, works pretty good. Medicare works pretty good. People like it. So that is a good model that we just need to spread.
agree.
So, all right. Well, we've gone on probably too long. So I do
Not
want
too
to.
long. I have to make it. I had to make it count. If I'm on your podcast for the first time, got to make it a good appearance. So
Good. Well, I appreciate you doing it and doing a good
thank you.
job. And so, any parting words of wisdom before we leave?
Yeah, just it's time for us to stand up and prove who the bosses are in Indiana, and that's us Hoosiers. And Todd Young doesn't have town halls. He doesn't really care about what we think, and it's time for us to send him packing. And the only way to change Washington D.C. is one representative and one senator at a time. And let's change Todd Young and put me in there, and I promise you, I'll be a disruptive force and help fix that place. So thank you very much for letting me come on your podcast, Deborah.
Great. All right. Now, see, now you always make me think of something else. So there's something else. The other thing is the voter turnout. That is going to be so crucial. And particularly in your area, in St. Joe County, Marion County, Democrats are not coming out to vote the way they
Well,
need to. So we've really
that's
got to
on me
work on that.
too. I have to be the type of candidate that gets people want to go out and vote. That's on me too. So if I can't excite people and get them to show up to vote, then I'm not a very good candidate. So I'm going to take that responsibility onto myself and try to fire up our Democratic base and try to fire up people that, want to cross over and vote for me to go out there and beat Todd Young next
That's
November.
great. Right. And as you succeed at that, that will bring success to other Democratic candidates all down the ballot.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
that
I agree.
is super important to get Democrats out for all candidates, for all Democratic candidates. So, and you're kind of, leading the charge on that. You're the one
It
who
is
takes
leading.
most of the responsibility.
Next November, the U.S. Senate race will be top of the ticket, and that's a big responsibility for me. If I'm so lucky to be chosen in that regard, I promise I have to be a good leader, and I promise to work hard, knowing that if I have a good showing, it should help everybody on the ticket. And I want to be that positive force for the ticket. So,
Excellent. All right, great. Okay, well, thank you again, Mayor,
thanks, Deborah.
for doing this.
Bye.
I'm excited for your campaign, and I
Thank
wish
you. I
you
appreciate
all the best. All right.
it. I appreciate it.